I'm a professor at Western Michigan University in the Department of Cancer and Accounting Psychology. So that's what we're about 25th year. And so I'm also a licensed marriage and therapist. That's one of the mental health licenses that's available in the state of Michigan. I met my wife Karen at Purdue University in the doctoral program in marriage and family therapy. So we both have our doctors in the marriage and family therapy. So this is our kickoff session of 4 related to mental health. So we're going to have these next 4 weeks various topics related to mental health, issues and resources in the community. Today, what we're talking about is kind of an overview of what is mental health, what's going on, and how we see mental health in the news. This session is sponsored in part by the Justice and Diversity team. We've been talking about this issue. And so, you may remember, we did a survey last year, 2020, about how you start out by defining what mental health is. Mental health includes our emotional, psychological, and social well-being. So, relationships, how we're feeling, what we're thinking, affects how we think, feel, and act. It also determines how we handle stress, relate to others, make them worse. Mental health is important at every stage of life, from childhood. Currently, or some point in their life, if that is seriously debilitating mental illness. One of you are working already on medication. So some of what needs to happen in college is their care needs to be followed up now by the doctors in this local area or the health center. So we're seeing more and more people with mental health diagnosis, and at the college setting, we're seeing more serious mental health issues. About 1 in 25 U.S. adults lives with a serious mental illness, things like schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, or major depression. So that's a lower number, still about 1 in 25. So some people think, what causes mental illness? Well, several factors, and sometimes it's hard to tell exactly what's causing it. It's usually a combination of things. There's no single cause for mental illness. A number of factors such as, and this is something that's been kind of popular. Has anybody heard of adverse child experience cases? That's kind of a new language that's come up in the last several years. So people are really looking at the impact of trauma experiences earlier in life and how those impact and show up later in mental health challenges into adulthood. So those might include trauma, or history of abuse, whether that's child abuse, sexual assault, witnessing violence, et cetera. So a lot of interest in adverse child experiences. So we, again, that impact of those early experiences into adulthood. Now it's interesting to think about too, literature on resilience. There are some people that have those kind of experiences, but they don't seem to be as greatly impacted by those things at all. Other things, experiences related to other chronic medical conditions such as cancer or diabetes. We talked a little bit about that. One of the interesting things is really looking at biological factors, such as chemical imbalances in the brain. And we'll hear people talk about that, well, a person has a chemical imbalance. Basically what that means is several different hormones, different pieces of the brain get impacted, things like serotonin, norepinephrine. So some people have less of one or more of one, and that often is associated with some kind of some of the popular SSRIs, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. What that means is that those drugs help keep more serotonin in the brain. So rather than serotonin leaving, it keeps it in the brain, and that helps with pleasure, helps with happiness, those kind of things. So SSRIs include popular drugs like Prozac, Paxil, Lexapro, and some of those kind of things. So one of the nice things about those drugs is compared to a previous generation of medication for depression and anxiety, they don't have quite so many side effects. Still have some, but quite so many previous ones. So family history also plays a role. And I'd say two different things there. So as a family therapist, we can certainly appreciate what kind of dynamics are happening in the family that might lead to or exacerbate or worsen mental health challenges. One of the things research in schizophrenia is that very harsh communication, criticism, simplification, lack of security and support in the family system. So some of those things can also be, in addition to genetic factors. I think as we learn more, we see in family histories, different generations of people showing up with anxiety or depression or other mental challenges. These hormones can also be a factor that might contribute to mental health issues. And one of the other interesting things to think about too is that sometimes people treat mental health challenges with alcohol and drugs. A common one is bipolar disorder. Bipolar, has the manic and depression, so those mood swings. So many times people don't like to take the mood stabilizers, like lithium and some of those products, because they have a lot of that side effects. So they end up self-medicating to manage their symptoms. So they'll drink or smoke pot or various things to kind of calm them down. And when they're low, they'll take more uppers. So they're constantly, playing around with drugs to kind of, help up and out their mood. The last thing, just not an exhaustive list, this is just a few highlights. Having feelings of loneliness or isolation. We'll talk about that a little bit of how mental health is in the news. So you may be aware of that. In general, how the report last year really emphasizing price. So some of us So some recent trends in mental health in the U.S. There have been increased mental health conditions. So we're seeing around that. There's concerns about that coming from the southern border. What can you do to regulate that? And I would say for me, as we think about those kind of different trends and issues with substance abuse, it seems that people are yearning for something, that they're not having their needs met, so they're needing to put something in their body to help them feel better. So again, that's a key role we can play as a faith community, help you meaning into people's lives, to help them, look at something beyond themselves. So those are important to consideration. So some trends in adolescent mental health. Youth drug overdose deaths have spiked, doubling from 2018 to 22. So just in 4 years, and again, COVID is part of that. So there were 753 deaths in the U.S. In 2022, overdose deaths, and a lot more adults, of course, too. 80% of those were related to opioid overdose. The big piece of that is gun violence and mass shootings have increased. And we'll be talking a little bit more about that. That's one of the ways that mental health is in the news as people see those different events that happen, and inevitably there's arguments about what's causing that. Is it the guns? Is it the mental health issue for the shooter or the family? So we'll be taking a closer look about that in a little bit. So in 2021, just a couple years ago, 42%, so 4 out of 10, adolescents reported feelings of sadness, and that was up about 14% from 2011. So in 10 years, we see quite an increase of sadness. One of the things to consider when we're looking at mental health is various aspects of diversity. And so this one has to do with research on the mix. Some studies don't show a huge difference between racial minorities and white individuals. Others have shown some things. So a couple of key things we see. Previously, suicide was much more of a experience. But in more recent years, Blacks and Hispanics are attempting and completing suicide at a higher rate. So that's an interesting piece to consider. One of the other things related to race and also poverty, socioeconomic status, is that racial and ethnic minorities have greater challenges with access to care and having insurance. That's a piece to be able to access. Some other trends in adolescent mental health. Suicide is the second leading cause of death among adolescents. So that's a huge problem. Second leading cause of death. I think the first leading cause of death are accidents. And adolescents tend to engage in riskier kind of behavior. And so they have a lot of accidents, car wrecks, not showing the judgment, all those kind of things. In terms of gender, we see female rates of suicide increasing. It used to be kind of thought that males had died by suicide more frequently, in part because they used more lethal means. So then they use like gun, where women didn't do that so much. They might overdose on pills or other kind of things that, with the prevention, are usually able to survive. But that's we're seeing an increase in females completing suicide. Another diversity consideration, LGBTQ plus youth are 3 times as likely to report anxiety and depression. Thoughts about why that may be?
Society.
Okay. What about society?
Your family is not supportive. They have nowhere to go because guess what? You're trapped when you're 12 years old. And whereas if you're 22, you can move away. You're stuck in that situation.
Right. A lot of times they're ostracized by families or kicked out or sent to conversion therapy to change them. Now, some of you probably are aware that a couple of years ago, maybe it was just last year, conversion therapy was outlawed in the state of Michigan. A recent poll found that 55% of the public see youth mental health issues as a crisis in the U.S. And many children and teenagers are not able to get the mental health services they need. And we'll see in a little bit kind of how Michigan ranks in terms of adults and adolescents.
Can I ask,
Yes.
what's the difference between a mental health illness and experiencing a mental health crisis, I think you called it earlier? So let's say in the LGBTQ example, you're a victim of bullying, but you might have some of those symptoms, but you're not necessarily diagnosed with, you have a mental health condition that might. Is there a difference between a mental health condition and a mental health illness?
That's it. Sometimes those terms are used synonymously. A lot of times, it's not just illness involves getting diagnosed. Some of you may be familiar with the book that we have on disorders is the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. They update that every several years to determine what's a mental health diagnosis and not, what are the criteria that would warrant a diagnosis. So that's typically, I think, what we're talking about. Of course, there are other challenges, struggles that may not. Sometimes that may mean they haven't been to see anybody also, but they still have challenges with their diagnosis.
It changed a lot since the 1974. It was considered homosexuality and mental health disease. You remember that?
Yes, that was true. So it's political, it's supposed to be a scientific thing. But we know that typically it's older white males who organize and contribute to the DSM. So that's a bias. Another example more recently is when we think about transgender issues, that used to be considered a diagnosis. And now they moved away from gender identity disorder to gender dysphoria. Basically, that means unhappiness with your gender, pervasive thoughts about wanting to be the other gender. So they focus now more on the dysphoria rather than the gender identity. So that's a key shift for trans folks and other advocates. That it's not about, wishing to be another gender. It's not dysphoria that's associated.
If we think about it, it's really like we do with physical health, with chronic conditions. You're naturally, your body is set to have type 1 diabetes, right? That's a condition that is part of your body. It's a chronic lifetime condition. Whereas we also have acute conditions, right? I broke my ankle or I did something that's ready to go right now. So we kind of think about some of these mental health situations.
Sometimes you have that, let's say, major depression. And that's something I have struggled with, and a lot of people in my family have too. And so there's episodic that, and for me, it's often around transitions. So you may be doing fine for a while, and then something happens, and you're thrown off, and then you might have another exacerbation of that. So we see that in mental illnesses too, mental conditions. That you may be stable for a while, and some circumstances change, and you see another evidence of that. So it's kind of chronic, it's more episodic, really. Okay, so trans in adult health. beyond. So 21% of adults, experiencing mental illness, so that's consistent with the 1 in 5 that we saw earlier. 15% of adults had a substance disorder in the past, and of those 15%, 93% did not have seek treatment. So 15% of adults, substance issues, 93.5% did not receive treatment. Fifty-five % of adults, or more than half of adults with a mental illness, receive no treatment. That constitutes about 28 million adults in the U.S. 11% of adults with mental illness are uninsured. Of all the adults with mental illness, reported that they were not able to receive the treatment they needed, that's 28%. Most reported they did not receive care because they could not afford it. So another 23%, so almost a quarter of adults report 14 or more mentally unhealthy days each month. So that's almost half a month. So that's almost a quarter rate of adults. And again, many were not able to see a doctor because of the issue. So a couple of things here. So how are we doing in Michigan? So this Mental Health America kind of ranks every state and determines most of 2 different factors really is a lower prevalence of mental health issues and higher rates of access to care. So we're just talking about challenges with access to care. So for adults in Michigan, we rank number 11. So that's pretty good. We're close to the top 10 and for adults. Much different number, 35 out of 51 states, county District of Columbia, where 35. So that's kind of a red flag, related to how Michigan is doing. Then overall, as a youth and adults altogether, we're ranked number 17. So kind of the top third. So not as bad as some other states. The worst state in the country for in this ranking was Kansas. One of them, Wisconsin, was the top one. Have they been for adults? I can't remember which one. But it's a little idea of where we're at in Michigan. So doing pretty well related to adults, but lots and lots of room.
What's the cutoff for adult?
It's probably 18 plus. I'm not sure on this one. It could be 21 plus. So one of the things again we were talking about today is what are we seeing in the news that is raised kind of mental health? And one of the things is a lot of celebrities and athletes coming out publicly talking about their mental health challenges. So for example, we have the Olympic gold medalist Michael Phelps talked about some serious episodes of depression. One of those episodes came shortly after the Olympics were over. So they do all this intense training, he did so well, but then he experienced depression after the Olympics. So he's been a spokesperson for Seeking Mental Health. He's been involved with a group that offers online mental health services. So he's been a big advocate. Somebody probably don't know quite as well as Kevin Lau. He's an NBA basketball player. He came out and identified as having trouble with anxiety. I think he missed part of the season for a while. He told the public, why that was. We're seeing more and more of those kind of things. Something that some more the younger people in the audience might recognize is Demi Lovato, Disney actress, singer, songwriter. She has been public about her struggle with bipolar disorder. and also some eating disorders earlier in their life. Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. When you know who The Rock is, Dwayne Johnson, what kind of adjectives would you associate with Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson? Strong. Big personality. What's that? Kind of a surprise to us, when he became public about having several episodes of depression. So we may see somebody who looks strong and healthy and vigorous and all that, but mental health can affect all kinds of different people. Lady Gaga, another mega celebrity. She identified that she had engaged in some self-harming behavior. Now, self-harming behaviors are kind of interesting. They're typically not associated with suicide, but they involve things like cutting the skin, burning yourself, various things like that. So she's talking about that. And with her mother, they co-founded a foundation called Born This Way. So we call it Destigmatized Mental Health Issues. So she and her mother are working on that effort together. So that's, I think, one of the things that has raised the awareness about mental health in our society. Celebrities coming out and being much more open, much more likely for people to talk about these things publicly. Okay, now we move to a touchy subject: gun violence and school shootings in the U.S. So we hear lots of discussion about these issues, particularly after another event. We had one just down the road in Oxford that's been in the news quite a bit. Just recently, trials related to the shooter, the mom, and the dad's trial coming up. We'll get your take on that a little bit. So if you think about liberals and conservatives, those are general, kind of distinctions. But liberals generally have been advocating for increased mental health services and access for quite a while, especially in schools. So a lot of schools previously did not have a school counselor, especially elementary schools. And typically the roles of school counselors vary quite a bit. In high school, they don't actually do a whole lot of counseling. They do more testing, they do more college advising. It depends on how many there are, but usually they're not doing a lot of direct counseling. Now, they are aware of different issues that happen with students, and they refer out, for counseling. So the lack of school counselors and the lack of school counselors really devoted to mental health issues of students has been an issue. So conservatives on the other side are quick to blame mental health reasons for gun violence, for shooters. Now, it is true that often as we dig into people's backgrounds who have, done a mass shooting, they typically do have some significant challenges. Difficult family life, maybe not very connected with their dad. We usually see these as younger men, sometimes middle-aged men. So Republicans and conservatives are quick to say this is a mental health issue. Also, we need to say this is not a gun issue. This is mental health. But one of the things we know about people with mental health issues, they're generally not a violent group. Now, there are public examples of that. Several years ago, we had a mentally ill man who was killed or did something to somebody in the bus station downtown. And that was a very public story. So we had these examples of that which make us maybe think that, okay, mentally ill means they're going to be violent. And that's not typically the case. But so there's a lot of struggles about what's going on. But one of the things, at least that is happening, we'll look at that some different pieces of legislation, is that there have been some bipartisan efforts to do more with mental health, to increase access, to have more school counselors in the schools. So that's one positive outcome. We'll look at some details about that. So, very public, big court case recently. The mother of the Oxford shooter was convicted for involuntary manslaughter. So, thoughts about that? What do you think about what responsibility parents have for the actions of their kids?
Change from that's going to be something to watch.
Yeah.
you know, our parents are going to possibly have the same charge.
That's true. Well,
No, I think in this case, it's a winter because I don't like it when you leave the school or when you leave my house. Never, I'm not meeting you, I'm paying for something. But in this case, the parent bought the gun for that kid. They provided that for him as opposed to just not knowing. They knew and still provided them weapons. But I think
ignoring this police for help.
exactly. And the school's pleased for him to get help.
Exactly. That way,
Yes, so there are definitely a lot of unique factors here.
There's a wonderful article on MEA Today, I don't know, there's pieces in here. The whole magazine that was on Oxford. And reaction from the kids and what happened. All those kids knew. Yeah, a lot of the kids knew that he was in trouble when they kept asking for help for him and then the school would have to give him. They asked him the day.
Yeah.
The day, yeah, what he did.
Yeah.
I think that's more about kids in their school than I think the administration.
And that's why I like to know, the peer programs work.
Yeah, there's kind of moving on, see something, say something.
Yeah.
That's
There's a lot of,
There's another, what I was troubled by is the school cannot be held accountable. They're protected by the government,
Mhm.
which I don't understand.
Yeah, and in this case, if I recall the details correctly, I think the kid had a gun in his backpack during the day that they had the conference with the parents. But nobody searched his backpack, they couldn't find the gun. And how did they get it? The gun?
I think there's a couple factors in this discussion. First of all, your comments about the liberals versus conservatives is about blame, as are some of these other comments. And so how important is it to find out who to blame as opposed to putting energies into solutions? But also I think this raises the question of the mental health of the parents. When you talk about holding parents responsible or other people responsible, in what role? As the caregivers, as what kind of people get to the point where they are so unaware of their children's mental health? They may not be mentally healthy themselves.
That's true, that's a good point.
however, there are parents that really do think about it. I think it was last summer when the young man from Papa killed somebody, a couple people out in South Haven. They were riding, they were on videos, in the water, and he was on the pier and he shot them. 3 years before that, peers at Papa High School knew he was talking about a bomb. And they turned him in and they immediately, the police went over to talk to his parents confronted him. His parents are the ones that turned him in. And he went away for 2 years, but he wasn't there, not getting enough help. And then 3 years later, he did,
Yeah, that's hard. Well, thank you for engaging,
I'm just gonna ask you what the effects of what we see on televisions and movies, as to how strongly that influences the behavior of these people.
That's a great question. Another thing that comes up related to that discussion is video games. Where, people are killed and then they disappear or we don't really see the real consequences of some of this. There's been a variety of studies looking at that, and I think the reviews of images that in adolescents, we have to realize too that they have the sense of invincibility. It won't happen to them, and nothing's going to harm them. And so the brains aren't full as long. Our brains aren't full as long until about 25 years old. So, those factors, I think, come in.
I think if I were reading just the news at night and having it on a big screen TV and all that, is picturing and featuring many times just a group of men going out, killing someone or beating someone, or, some scene of that.
Yeah.
Which we are repulsed by it, but some people maybe are encouraged by that as being something they want to do.
Yeah, they've had a lot of debates in recent years about who they tell who the shooter was, and they use the person's name, all those things.
Just the link between school shootings and increase in anxiety, right? So even having the drills for active shooter in the schools, this is the kindergarten, right? And I get reports from parents that their kids, after they have the drill, are very distressed. Don't understand so much. So just connecting that is actually to anxiety.
Yeah, seeing all those sorts of
Teacher, I'm distressed.
What's that?
I'm distressed and like talking about it with the students and talking to people as an adult.
Yeah,
However, there are children that have been saved because the teacher put them in a closet and, knew what to do, lock the door and shut the blind. We had a training where his security had to act it out when he shot us. Oh, good. Yeah, he has no, teachers.
I mean, still, it could be traumatic to the teacher too, because when we were kids, we had to like dump underneath the desk because we were prevented from an atomic bomb. I never heard about atomic bomb until nothing that was phenomenal before I was born, where these kids hear about because they got shot.
yeah, that's certainly, as Karen said, raises anxiety overall. So even if those images don't people to follow those kind of acts, that's what we're saying, you can just like to.
And it's not just the training, which is a must-done technical skills. The importance of being alert and aware, the importance of access to, individuals who can help in stressful situations. I think what happens is people are going, okay, we're done. Well, you're not done, because this is a societal issue that's not going to go away. And we need to continue to have the conversation regularly with everyone about what this means.
She had a point. There's a high school.
Like the drill lady, like, he's now, let's like, okay, this is a drill. So then, lights go off, lock the door, get the shooter, like, I feel like most of the time, it's a student who's the shooter, basically, right? That student knows the drill because it's the same thing you've been doing. So like, it's really,
They only really guys do that.
yeah, basically.
They change their time.
Like,
last time, years ago, we had one where it's like, okay, normally they do it during passing time, so let's do it during passing time. But then there was like 50 kids who were coming into AP camp, and so then girls just asking more, and I'm like, well, we're all gonna die, and it's gonna shoot in because there's like 6 people. And I feel like, yeah, I also like, when they're over the drills, you're like, okay, if there was a drill, what classroom would I be? What classroom would I have like potentially in the shooter at? Like for me, I'm like, yeah, like, it takes some medicine, I
Thank you, sir.
even having to think about that when you're in high school, which traditionally not the safe space.
Right.
Right.
Okay, a couple of notes on some mental health related legislation over the years. Long back in the OAS Parity Act, which basically says mental treatment needs to be similar to medical and physical health treatment in terms of co-pays, benefits, and those kind of things. The American Rescue Plan Act of 2021, kind of a post-COVID effort, actually put $4 billion into state and local mental health efforts and some other things. Money to support mental health among healthcare professionals and first responders who were really traumatized by all the things going on with COVID. Incentives to expand Medicaid coverage in states and various things. So last year, in 2022, was the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. This was the bipartisan effort to do something about gun violence. And a big piece of that was in schools, more school counselors, those kind of things. So there have been some bipartisan efforts to do something, of course, more needs to be done. Another big piece in the news that's related to mental health is COVID. Of course, with the isolation, the change in people's routines, the loss of jobs, loss of income, all those are factors that have come into play. We're coming out of that some, but still some of those influences are present. One of the other dynamics, and some of you maybe have dealt with this, is kids who had launched because of loss of job, challenges with housing, came back, to the family home. And that can be very upsetting. You're used to as empty nesters, a certain routine, and you all of a sudden have kids back, they've been independent, but they have to follow rules in the house. And also just people on top of each other all the time. When schooling's done, parents are involved in schooling. So lots of challenges. So some of the things you see from that was an increase in substance use, increase in anxiety, depression, domestic violence, and partner violence increased. And peaked in 2018, and then for a couple of years they declined some, but they'll pick that up and back up again. So interesting. This is what I mentioned earlier, the report from our Surgeon General just last year on isolation and enrollments. That's an interesting thing for the Surgeon General. We usually think about related to physical health. Came out with this report. COVID, of course, exacerbated the sense of isolation. Even before the onset of COVID, approximately half of U.S. adults reported experiencing measurable levels of loneliness. Disconnection with others, lack of connection with others, fundamentally affects our mental, physical, and societal health. Loneliness in our lives, lacking connection, can increase the risk of premature death as much as daily smoking does. But really, an epidemic, again, is something for us to think about as a community. How are we going? We're reaching out to our more isolated members.
Isolation is being a contributing cause, and the absence of connection, being the lack of part of the solution.
Attack their thumbs at some point, but that's so yeah, if you want to go on medical, especially hand and stuff, we probably have everything you always do.
Fear of missing out.
Fear of missing out. Very good. I thought I threw a little acronym in there, we were using social media. But fear of missing out. So, I missed something. I get you back on here. So those things. Increased anxiety. Also, there have been more studies on all that screen time and the impact on the brain. Most good sleep recommendations include getting off of screens at least an hour before you go to bed. Or having some filters on things that kind of blocks out some of the blue, whatever, those kind of things. So And one of the things that, I've seen in regard to that is the lack of verbal communication skills. And they're so afraid to use the phone. Yeah, it's text. What's that, what you say?
That's not fun. It's stressful. Like talking face to face is fine. Texting with me, because you're like, I'm sure there's like a tone in it, but like, it's just stressful because it seems like more, I don't know, like, yeah.
Yeah.
I'll say if you teach, you're gonna call these people back and tell them because they won't answer the phone.
That's true. Yep, yep. But on the flip side, we're seeing getting developed a lot of positive uses of technology. So we have positive mental health and mindfulness apps that are quite accessible, some free at a certain level, big more for, a little bit better services. So for example, WMU has integrated in the last few years a couple different apps for health and wellness. One is called WellTrack. The other one's called You at Westman. So these are available to the whole campus community, and I think both of them are. So those are a couple examples locally, some apps that they use. A couple other ones that we mentioned, Breathe to Relax, so breathing, meditation, mindfulness things, and the app Calm. They have a lot of different ones that call Calm or guided meditation, the sounds like water falling.
My smartwatch has a stress breathing
Okay.
function. I can scroll over it and do a 2-minute breathing exercise right from my watch.
Yeah, so those are positive, things about technology. Now, another big thing that happened, it's already happening to a certain extent in mental health treatment, was telehealth, online access. Everybody went to that during COVID because we couldn't hardly have any face-to-face. Some people are still continuing doing a lot of their work remotely. It's more accessible, it's more convenient. Our work, Karen works in private practice, talks about, it's just easier for the couples not to have to get a babysitter. They can do it from home. It's much more convenient. And so she's still mostly seeing clients virtually.
I would say one negative though is that if you're looking for in-person, sometimes that's very important. It's getting harder and harder to find a provider willing to meet you for counseling services in person.
Yeah, it's a good point. So that's, and AI, artificial intelligence, there's going to be interesting to see what happens with that. There's some talk about maybe IA can be the counselor. What's that going to look like? But there may also be uses. AI has been helpful maybe in diagnosing, putting all this different data together and putting a profile together. Somebody was just at a conference last weekend, and they talked about AI being really useful to come up with case examples for teaching. So I haven't ever used that. I got about 6 more years of lessons. So I'm trying to hold off AI.
But your students aren't.
No, they aren't. Okay, some general emerging trends, some we've seen already, some we may be happening in the future. So blood testing and work with DNA to diagnose mental health disorders, and also to make treatment more specific. So for example, one of the challenges with depression is a lot of times the first medication you try doesn't work very well. And so you may try a different one. And that has some side effects. You may try a third one. So there's some testing that can be done ahead of time to give you a profile, say, based on your body, your, genetic stuff, that this medication may be the best that you can try. So that's a helpful kind of thing. Counseling compact to increase portability of access. As you may be aware, each state has their own laws about mental health, licensing, frequency, and most states, prior to COVID, said, if I want to counsel somebody in Indiana, I can't do that because I'm not licensed there. So this counseling compact is an effort to, so lots of states get together and said, yeah, we'll work cooperatively. You can see somebody in this state. You can see somebody in this state. Michigan so far has not joined in that compact, and I think about 30 states are in, so that's kind of a newer effort between. Employee mental health is becoming a top priority, as employers see the impact of mental health. See the impact of causing, toxic environment, people missing work, not being as productive. So we're seeing a more greater interest in employee mental health. Telehealth is likely to remain a favorite platform. As we're hearing, it's hard to define in-person counseling. We mentioned that ACEs before, adult experiences or children experiences, and trauma-informed care. We hear a lot of stuff about trauma-informed care. And even consideration for particularly racial minorities, generational trauma, what's happening over time, and the impact that can have on people in the current age. Another interesting piece related to mental health is a growing understanding of how our brain works. And we see that also in couple therapy when we're looking at neurobiology and relationships. So one of the things they're learning about is neuroplasticity. How many of you learned at some point that once brain cells are gone, they can't really come back? Well, they actually can. And so they've done studies, people, a couple in the bonding moment actually rewires their brain. And to help, move away from trauma, because the brain is more plastic than we knew it was before. What's that?
I was thinking about it.
Yeah. Now, another one that's been kind of controversial is the advancements in psychedelic research. Those of us from several generations back, we heard about LSD, mushrooms, various things. Ecstasy and Molly are more recent examples of that. Ketamine is a very recent example. We hear sometimes ketamine being a cause of overdose death. But ketamine actually has been a useful treatment for some people, at least, it's really hard to treat depression. And so they've been doing more studies about these things. Basically, without getting into a lot of technical stuff, it alters the brain. It alters the consciousness in some way. That makes it easier for people to envision a possibility without, to overcome trauma. So this is not something that I've dabbled with at all or experimented with myself. But I've had some students who have done presentations on this, learning more about that. So in 2017, just a few years ago, the FDA classified this kind of treatment as a breakthrough therapy designation, meaning that there seems to be some growing scientific evidence that this may be useful. And they've recently been asked to review it more formally. So that may happen pretty soon. So that ends my presentation. Just wanted to mention a couple of the ones coming up. So next week, we're looking at local mental health needs and resources. Some of you are aware of ISK, Integrated Services in Kalamazoo, is a large public mental health and substance abuse service providers. So Tim Kanan in our church works for them. He's a supervisor and does work with adults and also emergency services. So he's going to be a speaker next week. In 2 weeks, February 25th, the main topic is supporting family or friends with mental health challenges. Some of you may be familiar with a group called NAMI, the National Alliance for Mental Illness. So they do a lot of programming, provide resources for family members of people with mental illness, advocacy efforts. We have a pretty active chapter here in Kalamazoo. So we're going to have at least one person, maybe a couple of people from the local NAMI chapter to come and talk about some of the things that they're providing, some possibilities that they have in the community, and also talk some about how we can be a good support to family or friends with mental health issues. And the last one, March 3rd, is going to be looking at the church and mental health and evolving history. So Pastor Rachel's going to assist with that, looking at how has the church kind of looked at way back it used to be, and you could sin or you're possessed by the devil. That's why you're having.
Exorcism, maybe.
Yeah. So that, of course, has evolved, but still there's some stigma associated with some of those earlier ideas. So
A couple questions.
Yep.
Have you been recording this session? Okay, awesome. And then will the slides themselves be available on the website or?
We make them available, yeah, and I haven't yet, so I'll talk with later.
Yeah.
Gary, I have a two-part question.
Yeah.
You touched upon heredity.
Mhm.
How much does heredity play in mental illness? That's the first one.
You know, I think we certainly see patterns in families. So for example, schizophrenia. Usually, when you have somebody that's presenting with a diagnosis of schizophrenia, that's in the family backgrounds. So you know, the answer to that for me is, in addition to that, is the tone in families, the attitudes, the ability to have difficult conversations, also, that's one of the psychosocial, you know, kind of attitudes. One of the things, you know, in my work and one of the things I want to do is have somebody with some fairly significant substance use. Often there's an unresolved death earlier in the family. And they coped with that death and that pain and sadness with substance abuse. And that then becomes a new problem for them because those things are very addictive and they're good at numbing pain. So that'll be my first quick answer to that.
So the second question is, a parent who has been diagnosed with mental health issues, is it a good or bad idea? And I can see either side of this, of having a conversation with their children about the experiences that they're going through. The good part I can see is that if the child ends up with that same thing, then they know, you know, what to do. The bad part is it might increase anxiety that I don't know what's going to happen. Am I going to get this or not? So is there any recommendation on how parents should handle that with letting their children in on
Yeah, that's a good question too. I say one thing is, you know, communicate in a way that's developmentally appropriate.
Right.
Yeah. So, you know.
until you're 5 though?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think my belief in general is that it's better to talk about those things. It's like we were just saying, one of the things that gets passed down is not talking about challenging things. And I think one of the other things that happens in families when there's secrets, that has an impact on people too. They don't know what's going on. They can tell something's going on, but nobody's talking about it. That can have its own impact. And that I think can be, you know, at least lessened by people openly talking about what's going on. Keep up with the secrecy and you know, have open communication. I think we're right at 10:15. So thank you for your attention and. Thank you. Ask me about other topics related to this.